I want to tell you about the morning my brother pointed at the door and told me to get out, not quietly, not with any of the complicated guilt that should accompany throwing your sister out of her own home, loudly, confidently, with the specific energy of a man who believes he is entirely within his rights. "This is my house," he said, "and I want you gone by Friday." I looked at him for a long moment, then I said, "Okay," and I left. Not because he was right, because I already knew something he didn't, and I had decided, standing in that hallway with my brother's voice still bouncing off the walls, that Friday was going to be a very interesting day. Let me tell you about the house. Our parents had built it 40 years ago, a project that had taken 3 years and every resource they had, savings, weekends, the specific stubborn love of two people who wanted to create something permanent for their family. It was not a grand house, but it was theirs, completely, entirely, built with their own hands, theirs. They had raised us in it, my brother Daniel and me. Daniel was 4 years older, louder, the kind of son who filled a room and got called ambitious when women with the same quality got called difficult. My parents had adored him. So had I once. Our parents had passed within 18 months of each other. First our father, then our mother, who I believed had simply decided that a world without him wasn't one she wanted to navigate for very long. The grief had been enormous. The estate process had been complicated. Daniel had assumed, in the way that oldest sons in certain families assume things, that the house would be his. He had moved in 3 months after our mother passed, began making changes immediately, new paint, new furniture, the kitchen renovation our parents had never gotten around to. I had said nothing. I was still grieving. And I had known, quietly, privately, that there was a conversation coming that would change everything. I was waiting for the right moment. Daniel, as it turned out, provided it. The argument that preceded the eviction was about money. It was always about money with Daniel. He had borrowed from me twice in the previous year, substantial amounts, the kind of borrowing that comes with promises and timelines that slide and slide until the original conversation seems almost fictional. I had asked, gently, once, about repayment. He had taken this as aggression. "You're keeping score," he said. "Family doesn't keep score." I said, "Family also repays what they borrow." The conversation escalated in the way these conversations escalate when one person has been storing things up for much longer than the other realizes. And then he said it. "This is my house, and I want you gone by Friday." He said it like it was a fact, like it was simply and obviously true. His house. I picked up my bag. "Okay," I said, and I walked out the front door of the house my parents built, for the last time as a guest. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with my mother 6 weeks before she passed. I had driven down for the weekend. She was tired, the specific tiredness of a person whose body is winding down, but whose mind is still entirely present. We sat in the garden she had planted 30 years ago and tended with the consistency of someone who understood that beautiful things required daily attention. She held my hand, and she told me about the well. My mother had not been a complicated woman, but she had been, quietly, a perceptive one. She had watched Daniel for years, with the specific eyes of a mother who loves her son completely and sees him clearly at the same time. She had seen the borrowing, the entitlement, the assumption, and she had made a decision. "The house goes to you," she said, "in trust. I've spoken to the attorney. It's already arranged." I had not expected this. "Mom, Daniel will contest it," she said, with the calm of a woman who has already thought through every possible outcome. "So the trust is structured specifically. Your father and I discussed it years ago. It cannot be broken." He'll be angry, I said. Yes, she said. He will. She squeezed my hand. But it's your home, she said. It was always supposed to be your home. Your brother has always been able to take care of himself. You're the one who has always taken care of everyone else. I had not told Daniel. My mother had advised against it, not out of cruelty, but out of strategy. Tell him when you need to, she had said, not before. I had honored that. Through the funeral, through the estate process, through Daniel moving in and repainting the walls and renovating the kitchen and making the house his own with the confidence of a man who had never once questioned his right to things. I had watched, said nothing, continued making my quiet monthly payments into the trust account that my mother's attorney managed, continued knowing. The day after Daniel told me to leave, I called the attorney. Her name was Patricia Chen. She had been my mother's attorney for 20 years, and mine for the past 18 months. She picked up on the second ring. He asked me to leave, I said. I see, she said. Are you ready to proceed? I thought about the house, the garden my mother had planted, the walls my father had built with his own hands, the kitchen Daniel had renovated without permission on a property he had never legally owned. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Patricia sent the documents on Thursday morning, registered mail, delivered to the house. I know this because Daniel called me at 11:15. He didn't say hello. What is this? He said. What does it say? I asked pleasantly. It says, he stopped. I heard paper. It says the property is held in trust for you. Yes, I said. That's not possible, he said. Mom would have. Mom did, I said, 6 weeks before she passed. Patricia has the full documentation. The trust was established 4 years before that with Dad's agreement. It's ironclad, Daniel. I had it reviewed by 2 independent attorneys after Mom told me. Silence. The specific silence of a person whose certainty has just been removed from beneath them. You knew, he said, this whole time. Yes, I said. And you said nothing. You didn't ask, I said. You assumed. There's a difference. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. Not triumph, exactly. Something more complicated. The grief of a family that had arrived at this place. The sadness of a brother who had been so certain of his own version of events that he had never once considered there might be another. The weight of being right in a way that costs something real. What happens now? He asked. That depends on you, I said. I gave Daniel 30 days. Not because I had to. Legally, I could have moved faster, because 30 days felt like the human thing to do. Because my mother had loved him, because I had loved him once, and some part of me, the part that remembered who we had been before money and assumption and the particular corrosion of entitlement, still did. He spent the first 2 weeks angry, calling, leaving messages that ranged from legal threats to something that sounded almost like grief. I listened to all of them, returned none of them. In the 3rd week, something shifted. He called on a Tuesday afternoon, and when I answered, he was quiet for a long time before he spoke. I owe you money, he said. Yes, I said. I owe you an apology, he said. Yes, I said. I don't know how to do this, he said. I know, but I think you need to try. We met in person on a Saturday, at the house. My house. Daniel opened the door, which felt strange, I imagined, for a man who had spent 6 months treating it as entirely his own. He looked different, smaller somehow. The specific smallness of a person who has had their certainty removed and hasn't yet figured out what to replace it with. We sat at the kitchen table, the kitchen he had renovated, in the house my parents had built, that my mother had left to me. He talked for a long time about our parents, about what he had assumed and why. about the specific logic, flawed, self-serving, but not entirely incomprehensible, that had led him to believe the house was his, about the borrowing, the repayment he had intended and delayed until intention had become quietly habit. I let him finish. I had learned from my mother, from Patricia, from 18 months of knowing something and saying nothing, the value of letting people finish. "I have 2 things to ask," I said when he was done. He waited. "The money you borrowed," I said, "I want a repayment plan. Written, witnessed, with Patricia if you're willing." "Yes," he said. "And I want to talk," I said. "Not today, when you're ready, about what happened to us, to this family, because I don't want a brother who pays me back and disappears. I want an actual brother." He looked at me for a long moment. "I don't know if I know how to be that," he said. "I know," I said. "I think you need to learn." Daniel moved out 3 weeks later. He found an apartment 20 minutes away. We have dinner once a month now. It is not easy. It is not the relationship we might have had if things had gone differently, if assumption had never calcified into entitlement, if grief had brought us together instead of pulling us apart. But it is honest. For the first time in years, genuinely, uncomfortably, courageously honest. I moved back into the house on a Monday morning. I repainted the walls myself. The color my mother had always wanted but never gotten around to, a soft, warm cream that made every room feel like late afternoon. I planted new things in the garden, alongside what my mother had left, not replacing, adding, the way you do when you are trying to honor something while also making it yours. People ask me if I feel guilty for knowing and saying nothing, for letting Daniel renovate a kitchen in a house he didn't own and paint walls that weren't his and live with the confidence of a man whose certainty was entirely unfounded. And the honest answer is, sometimes, not often, but sometimes. What I feel more consistently is something else, gratitude, for a mother who saw clearly and planned carefully and trusted me with something she knew would be complicated, for an attorney who answered on the second ring, for the 30 days I gave Daniel that he didn't legally deserve but humanly needed, and for the house, the walls my father built, the garden my mother planted, the kitchen that now belongs to me. It always did. I just had to wait for the right moment to come home.